Welcome, everyone. If you can take your seats, that would be great. Good evening. My name is Megan Jeans. I'm the new Executive Director of the Westport River Watershed Alliance. Can you hear me? So I know a lot of new faces to me tonight, but I know a lot of you are regulars and some may be new to our series of talks, but welcome to all. So at the Watershed Alliance, we often describe ourselves as the voice of the river, and these talks are really designed to create space to learn, to talk, and to connect with members of our community. Tonight's conversation is going to be a really great example of that. Striped bass, a popular topic. It's really more than just an iconic species. It's the common thread that connects ecology, community, livelihoods, and conservation. And understanding their behaviors, their habitat, the stressors that they're under can really help us understand and confront some of the issues that are affecting the health of the river and the watershed as a whole. So we're fortunate tonight to have three people who have deep expertise and lived experience in these waters and works with striped bass. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, we have Captain Parker Mauck. Parker's a Westport resident who's been fishing in these waters for over 35 years. And he co-founded Westport Fly, a saltwater guiding service focused on fly and light tackle fishing, with a strong commitment to conservation and protecting the species that make this ecosystem so special. He's also a member of the American Saltwater Guides Association. And Captain Chris Killenberg is from Little Compton. He brings a similarly deep connection to this river and surrounding waters, also with more than 35 years of experience. He co-founded Westport Fly alongside Parker and is a former Westport River Watershed Alliance board member who continues to serve on our Fisheries Advisory Committee. So he's been part of this work from both the water and the organizational side. And finally, Mike Sullivan. Many of you know Mike. He's president of the Westport River Watershed Alliance's board of directors. He's also a retired engineer and a longtime community leader who's served on numerous town boards, including the Conservation Commission and the Climate Resiliency. He lives on the river and keeps a close eye on its health, and he brings a systems lens to how we think about stewardship. And I can attest to this because I was out in the marsh this morning helping him check tidal gauges. So together they really bring a diverse mix of on-the-water experience and scientific curiosity and deep local knowledge. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Are you going to start us off?
Well, I think you've done an excellent job on the introductions. I don't need to say any more except for the fact that the only reason I might be considered a fisherman is because I rub up against these guys a little bit in this osmosis. So these are the real experts here, so they're going to start off the presentation.
Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm kind of the warm-up band for the main act here. These guys are going to talk about some really interesting conservation efforts going on. My job tonight is just to put up some very general information. There's a lot of experienced anglers out here that this may seem like news you already know of, or information you already know, but I think it's important foundational stuff to set the scene for some of the things that Chris and Mike are going to talk about. So, striped bass in the river. The biology of the striped bass, some comments about the type of habitats that they tend to show up in, and then finally sort of what the future holds for striper populations, and some of the information that gives us insights to striper populations. So Orvis is a fishing rod and reel company, and their fishing guru, Tom Rosenbauer, has this great expression about striped bass, and just, it's the way a fish is supposed to look. It's got all the components of a perfect looking fish. Striped bass are anadromous, so basically they live their life in saltwater, but they return to freshwater to breed, and then they're born in freshwater also. So that's anadromous. And as we said before, kind of the premier inshore fish of our region for the marine environment. And that these fish, they migrate in a range that basically goes from their spawning regions in Chesapeake Bay up to southern Maine. There are some other biologic groups of striped bass up in Canada and elsewhere, but the ones that concern us in the East Coast here are the ones that range basically from Chesapeake up to Maine. The three major spawning areas. So the Chesapeake Bay with Virginia and Maryland is probably responsible for about 80% of the spawning activity for striped bass. The Hudson River is the second largest spawning region, and there's also a pretty significant amount in the Delaware River, but the Chesapeake Bay is by far the largest of the three spawning regions. So On the Water magazine does this really nice job of sort of tracking the migration of striped bass every year. These are the slides from their 2025 magazine articles. And you can see it on the one on the left-hand side there, the red area, that's the larger fish, 40 inches or so. The yellow are the 30-inch fish, and the green areas are where they are seeing schoolies. And you can see as you go from April to May to June, the red, the larger fish, and the yellow, the medium-sized fish, slowly migrate up north until you get to the New England area there. And by June, we've got a high concentration of all the largest fish up in our area there. A lot of this is all temperature driven. So for Westport, we are fortunately anchored right in the sort of dead center of the large fish region for our area on the East Coast here. So we just to the south of us, just to the north of us, and around our area, we do tend to see a really nice presence of larger striped bass. So size-wise, again, the larger fish are 40 plus inches. What we call a schoolie fish is, 14 to 28. The old term of a keeper is 28 inches. That was the old benchmark for where you could take a fish home and eat it, a keeper. And for years, anything above 28 was fair game to take home. Based on some, the newer forecasts for the populations of striped bass, some of the regulatory requirements have changed, and we now have what we call a slot. So for us in Massachusetts and all the states up and down the East Coast, we have a slot for striped bass, 28 to 31. So that's called a slot fish now. That's what we're allowed to keep in Massachusetts nowadays. It's a very slow-growing fish, so fast-growing fish tend to recover from challenges quickly, but striped bass are considered one of the more slow-growing fish in our waters. So when you look at the size and weight and age for fish, a 15-inch fish, 2 to 3 pounds, is probably 3 years. You get a fish that's 22 inches, now you're talking a 6 to 7 pound fish, about 5 years old. At 28 inches, 14 pounds or so, 7-year-old fish, that's the age at which the females are reproductively active. Males are reproductively active, at a younger, in that sort of 3 to 5 year range, but the females are not reproductive until about 7 or 8 years. And then when you get up in the larger fish, a 36-inch fish is 20, 25 pounds, but that's an 11-year-old fish, so it takes a while to get to that size. So in terms of habitats, one of the reasons why these fish are generally pretty successful and why we like them so much is because they're everywhere. They're in shallow flats, there are estuaries, deep water rips, in the surf, deeper water. They really are incredibly adaptive fish, and they can survive anywhere. They tend to gather in schools, but we also see them in solo, by themselves as well. They really tend to like moving water, so when we're trying to identify where we're going to see them, tides become a really important factor, obviously. The very biggest fish tend to feed at night more than the daytime. And they're ambush predators, meaning that they will commonly sort of stake up their spot in a zone that they like and wait for the tides and the currents and the structure to bring bait and food to them. And they feed on a wide variety of different types of things, like crustaceans, crabs, shrimps, a whole myriad of different kinds of bait fish, lobsters, small marine worms. I mean, you name it, these guys will eat it. So for here in Westport, because these fish can survive and be attracted to almost any kind of habitat, we see them everywhere. I mean, Larger fish may tend to be in the deeper channels in the river, but when you travel the river, literally in every nook and cranny and corner of the Westport River, you're likely to be able to see a striped bass somewhere. So this is some of the important stuff here that's going to set the stage for what Chris and Mike are going to talk about. The regulations for recreational and commercial fishing for striped bass are regulated by this thing called the Atlantic States Marine Fishery Commission. So it's 13 states. They have 3 members from each state on this board, and they are chartered by Congress to look over certain species of fish and set the regulations that they think are warranted to help those fish survive. The challenges right now are that the populations are not in great shape, and we'll show some of the information in a second. When I say questionable management, it's because, unfortunately for marine fisheries management, too often, in my opinion, the regulations and the efforts to sort of understand what we can and can't do are way more focused on what the people want, and not as much on what the fish want or what the fish need. So, and oftentimes regulations are set up and designed to sort of keep all these groups happy. And that's not always really what's in the best interest of the fish. And I'm going to come in here and some the spawning information. So with striped bass, it's pretty interesting. The reason why we have things like slot limits to protect bigger fish is because larger fish are exponentially better egg producers than smaller fish. Okay, 12-pound female will produce 850,000 eggs. A 55-pound female, which is a huge fish, right? Over 4 million eggs. So the bigger the fish, the more eggs that fish can put into the system. So some of these regulations are designed to try to protect those larger fish. This graph here is kind of the money graph. Basically what they do in Maryland every year is they have a very extensive and complex system to put out nets in the same places every year at the same times, and they capture fish and they measure the amount of fish that they're finding at a breeding stock at every single season. And what they do with that information is they come up with this juvenile index, and it's an indication of how successful the spawning is. Okay, and obviously there's some variation here. That red circle, a lot of the guys in the room will remember this. That red circle is back at our moratorium. There was a period leading up to that red circle where we had some very poor spawning successes, and you almost couldn't find a striped bass. It was almost impossible to go out and catch a striped bass. So the regulatory people got together and they decided, okay, the most effective thing we can do is to have a moratorium commercially and recreationally on keeping striped bass. So you weren't allowed to keep one. It generated what a lot of people consider to be one of the most successful conservation movements ever, because you can see immediately following that period of no harvesting, there were some dramatic increases in the spawning success, right? Way up above the average. And for many years that, there were some pretty good years there, some lower ones, some pretty good ones. What's really impacting the regulatory actions now and the concern we have now is when you look at some of these more recent years, 2015 was a pretty good year, right? Way above average. And 2017 and 18 were pretty good. And those were the fish that we saw in recent years in pretty decent numbers in that sort of 26 to 32 inch range. Those were all from that 2015 and 2018 year classes. Recently, the last 7 spawning years in a row have all been some of the 7 worst since they started keeping records. So that's why there's a lot of concern amongst fishermen now, is that we do not have younger classes of fish coming up behind these good ones. So the slot limits are designed to try to help protect those 2 good years, but we really don't have good numbers of smaller fish for the future coming up behind these. And that's kind of a close-up of those recent years. And what's really important about these years like this is that there's not a diversity in the size range and the age range of the fish that we have, okay? For a couple of different reasons, and I'll mention it in a second, it's really important for spawning success to have a range of sizes. You don't want to have just like 1 year of successful spawning and have one group of age class fish and then poor ones after that, because the diversity in that size and numbers is pretty important. This is the Hudson River, another major spawning area, and you can see here that the recent years there have been way below the desirable levels also. So this is the fishing mortality chart, and basically this is gathered from a bunch of different sources: commercial records, recreational records. I mean, if any of you guys have ever had the guys down in the boat ramps come up and ask you, did you catch fish today? How many fish did you catch? Et cetera, et cetera. That's one way that some of this is generated. And so we've had increased mortality recently, partially due to increased recreational effort. But you can see that the target and the thresholds are below where the fishing mortality rates have been. So we've got this unfortunate combination of low spawning and increased mortality. And what that gives us, when we look at what they call the spawning stock biomass, this is a snapshot of how many fish are out there, how many striped bass are out there in the ocean based on all these calculations. And you can see that from 2010 to now, basically, we've got this big dip there that is below the threshold. And that's because those two combinations of things are kind of hitting at the same time. The red circle was back when they did the no harvest period. So these are some of the alarm bells that we're looking at, and I mentioned before about the diversity of age groups. What's important about that is these fish tend to come into Chesapeake in waves. The bigger fish show up first, and then different waves of year classes show up to the Chesapeake for spawning. And in order for spawning success to happen, there's a whole bunch of climatic and environmental factors that have to all kind of line up perfectly. Water temperatures, water flows, food available to the hatching, tiny striped bass. Those things all have to line up perfectly. And when you have a diverse population, you have a much better chance of one of those groups hitting it just right. If you don't have a diverse population and the conditions are right, if there's not a good amount of spawning fish there at that time, you're going to get a poor spawn. So that it's really advantageous to have these diverse populations of different sized fish, because you have a much better chance of hitting it just right. So with these concerns about the level of mortality, the very poor spawns, there's a lot of attention with that commission to look at regulations and try to figure out how we can manage this without letting it get away from us. So there's two groups of thinking on how do you react to these kind of conditions. Well, the regulators are obviously charged to come up with, to develop science and to understand these things and give us guidelines. But the sort of the softer, but I think equally important component is us. It's the people in this room, the people that fish, the people that are on the water. What can we do at our sort of think globally, act locally kind of scale? What can we do here locally to try to give the fish that are in our area the best chance of surviving? So that is my kind of tee up to Chris.
So, Parker just sort of stole one of my lines, to think globally, act locally. But I was thinking about this a little bit today, and we hear that so often. I think it's lost its impact. And so one of the things I want to convince you of tonight is think locally and act locally. And here's why. And you're going to hear more about this from Mike in a second. But one of the things we think we understand about striped bass is they're habitual. They'll go back to same places every year to do certain things. The fish that come into the river to feed in the spring haven't just randomly showed up. They've showed up because they have some memory of something happening, some food event that they can stop in and have their food and continue on to the Cape, or they've come for the summer. They remember this is a place that's got good food all summer, I'm going to come to stay. And so what we think we understand is that's kind of wired in somehow. It may be innate, maybe they're teaching other bass, maybe they're bass that lead others, but the end result is they show up in our river at a specific time for a specific purpose, including staying all summer. And so one of the things I want to convince you of is, if we kill them while they're here, they won't come back. Not only will they not come back, they may not lead other fish back. They may not relay that message to subsequent generations that this is a place that's great to go in the summer, right? So when we say act locally, I think we have an outsized opportunity to affect the fish in our river by the behavior we exhibit in our river. And I want to do that on behalf of other communities where our fish come in and keep going. I want them to catch fish when they get up there, but when they're here, we have a chance to create a population of fish, or protect a population of fish that will come back next season. We can catch them, and the season after that, we can catch them there too. And we break that chain when we kill that fish. Whether we kill it on purpose or kill it on accident, it breaks that chain. So what I want to convince you of is, let's be conservation minded about our fish, because it doesn't just affect the grand problem, it really has an outsized effect on our own interest in fish in this river. So, question is, what can you do? So I'm going to give you three things to think about, right? Simply, eat something else, catch and release, and persuade a friend, okay? So, on the eat something else part, a lot of us here are fishermen. Some of you are just community members. Some of you like eating striped bass. I'll confess, I don't. But my point is, would you rather eat a striped bass or catch a striped bass? Or turn it around. If there are no striped bass in a couple of years, would you say, gosh, I really wish I could eat a striped bass today? Or would you say, gosh, I really wish I could go out and catch striped bass all summer, right? So I'd like to pitch the idea that for this summer, for this year, eat something else, right? We're at a point where the striped bass populations are critically under threat. There's lots of things to eat out there. And if you want to have a day out on the water and come back with seafood, do that. Just on your way home, stop at all the places locally that sell seafood. Westport Lobster, Lee's, the Oyster Farm, go to Back Eddy, go to Bayside. But for this year, consider taking the year off from eating striped bass, right? Because it's that critical to the population in the river and also broadly, right? So the second is consider catch and release. And I know some of you do that already, but as opposed to catching a fish and bringing it home, put it back in the water. It's not a crazy idea. There are fisheries all over the world, in this country, that practice this as a regular practice. It's common. Two very famous ones, bonefish and tarpon, Florida mostly. People are not allowed to keep either of them. With tarpon, you can't even lift a big fish out of the water by regulation. It has to stay in the water. If you want to take a picture with it, you have to jump in the water and get a picture with it, which you see. But they're that strict about protecting those fish that they have those regulations. Snook, again, Florida. I was in Florida fishing for snook last week. Snook are delicious, I'm told. And you can keep one a day, but most people don't keep them. And the sports fishermen really don't keep them because they revere them as a sport fish. They would rather catch them than eat them. Permit, which is kind of the holy grail of sport fish, amazingly, I didn't realize till I looked it up, you can keep 6 a day. Nobody keeps them because they're so revered as a sport fish, they wouldn't think of it, right? So it's not just a regulatory thing, it's a cultural thing too, that people have chosen not to keep specific fish that they value as a sport fish because they want them to survive. My argument to you is striped bass is our bonefish, our tarpon, our snook, our permit. It's the premier game fish for us and for lots of people around the world. They come here to fish for striped bass. It is the premier striped bass fishery in the country. No less important than these other fish. So let's start treating them similarly as people treat these other fish. See if I can do this right. No. Next slide, please. So, we talk about often mortality rates, which is kind of a scientific and sanitized, way to say killing fish. So I want to talk a little bit about catch and release and the fact that, when people kill a fish to take home and eat, well, that's clear. But when you catch a fish, look at it, take a picture, put it back in the water, they don't always make it. And so the Department of Marine Fisheries did a study in 2023, and what they found was across all tackle methods for striped bass, 4.5% of fish don't make it when they're caught and released. So 1 in 22 fish. If you go out in the river, say Saturday and Sunday on a weekend and happen to catch 20 fish, one of them's probably not going to make it, on average. They break it down into different approaches: bait, lures, flies. Bait happens to be a higher mortality rate, and I don't want to be critical of bait fishing. It's just it's a different way of fishing. Oftentimes the bait is sitting motionless on the bottom. The fish inhale it. Even with eels, oftentimes you wait for a little while to get them to, the fish is on and you're letting them really swallow it before you set the hook. It's a different type of fishing. Lures tend to have fewer hooks, tend to be moving. Flies tend to have one hook and moving. And so oftentimes with flies, the fish gets it and it's just barely got it. It's hooked in their mouth, and that's a great place for a fish to be hooked because it doesn't cause as much damage. It's a difference of the style, and not meant to be a criticism of bait and an elevation of flies. But you see the numbers, right? And so that's where we are now. And what we can do is use best practices to improve these numbers. So a couple of things. Next slide. Okay. The number one thing you can do is keep fish wet. If you're going to catch a fish, think of the scenario: you pull it in the boat, it's flopping on the deck, you're trying to get your pliers and get the hook out, and then you're getting your hands clean, then you're handing it to somebody, you forgot your camera, you're looking for your camera, you take a picture, the fish has been out of the water for, a minute, 2 minutes. So the number one thing you can do is keep that fish wet. And you look at this chart here, for those of you who may not be able to see, this is 0 to 30 seconds, this is 2 minutes, etc. So 0 to 30 seconds, 2.8% is the mortality rate. At 60 seconds, it roughly doubles. At 2 minutes, roughly quadruples. So there's a huge benefit to keeping the fish out of the water the minimum amount of time. It's not that hard to do, really. I mean, I have a net on the boat. When the fish comes in, I net it and I leave it in the boat. And then I wait till everybody's got their camera and everybody's all set, etc. Then we pull it out of the water, take the hook out, take a quick picture, put it back in. An ideal picture for me is one where they're holding the fish and there's a drip of water coming off the tail. I know I've done my job to accelerate things. But if you have a net, it's not that hard. The other thing is, it's just easy. It's less chaos, right? So even if I don't need a net, if I have a small fish, I still do it because it's better to the fish. Okay, next picture. Oh, back up. Okay. The second is reduce injury. So bleeding fish are 5 times more likely to die. Why do fish bleed? Sometimes you happen to catch the hook in the gills, but oftentimes it's just a matter of puncture wounds in the fish, right? And so, again, from the same mortality study, this is a single hook on a lure, a fly, whatever. These are 2 single hooks. And you see, it goes up a little bit. If you think of it as single hook has 1 point, 2 single hooks, 2 points. A single and a treble, now that's 4 points, right? The treble just has 3 hooks, so you get a little bit better with just 3 hooks. 2 trebles has 6 points, and so it's twice as likely to kill the fish as a single hook. So one of the things we preach is get away from treble hooks. They cause a lot of damage. It's not just the hook that's originally caught the fish, but it's the one that catches their face or their, another part of the fish in the action. The other thing you can do is pinch your barbs down. As many of you know, but for those who aren't fishermen, the hook has a point, but it also has a barb that's meant to keep the hook from coming out of the fish. Well, that's fine, except that when you're trying to get the hook out of the fish, because you want to speed things up, that slows you down. And so a simple plier could pinch that barb down, no problem. And people say, well, I'm going to lose more fish. My experience is not the case. As a matter of fact, I think for novice fishermen, you get better hookups with a pinched barb because the hook goes into the fish more easily. So I'm not convinced that it hurts your success, so to speak. What I am convinced of is it's less injury on the fish, it quickens the process of getting the hook out so that you have less time out of the water, etc. And occasionally I get hooks stuck in me. And the same thing can happen to you. It's a whole lot easier to get out of you when it doesn't have a barb in it. So it's one of the things you can do that kind of helps to compound the benefits of the other things you're thinking about. And then reduce stress generally, right? Avoid long fights with fish. It tires them out. And part of the problem is they don't have enough oxygen and it just builds up and they just can't recover. Another thing that's important for the river is avoid hot water. Once you get into July, especially on outgoing tides in the afternoon, the river's hot. And I don't fish the river at 75 degrees. Now, in July, even in August, in the morning on an incoming tide, the water can be cooler. But in the afternoon, you can get up to 80 degrees in parts of the river. That's a really tough environment for striped bass. Once they get over 75 degrees, the mortality rate starts to really spike. So I avoid that. And then the other thing is to take your time to revive the fish. What I do is get the fish in the water. Oftentimes I have, if I have a guest fishing with me, have them hold the fish. And what I say to them is, when he's ready to go, he'll splash you in the face. That's exactly right. And that might take 30 seconds, it might take 2 minutes. In the meantime, you're holding a wild animal in your hand. I mean, how often do you get a chance to do that? Enjoy it, look at it, enjoy the environment, etc. And when he's ready to go, he'll let you know and he'll splash and go. And then you can go catch another fish. Okay. All right, so then the third one is persuade a friend. So I'm trying to persuade you, so take these points to your friends so we can multiply this effect. So it doesn't have to be confrontational, right? Take a year off from eating striped bass, eat something else. There's lots of good stuff to eat. You don't have to eat striped bass. Every striper we catch and release is a striper that can reproduce later, as Parker was pointing out. Every striper we catch and release is a striper we can catch again later. We tag. Mike's going to talk about a special kind of tagging, but there's another kind of tagging that goes on in striped bass. We catch tag fish. Stripers are smart enough, but they're not geniuses. You'll catch the same striper a couple times. So if you take care of them and put them back, you have a chance to catch them again. It's not like they're going to remember that specifically and not ever be caught again. They will. And then this is really the local argument, right? Every striper we catch and release in the Westport River and take care of is a striper that may return to us next year, right? And the year after, and may lead their friends here, right? And Mike's going to explain a tagging program that we've started that's meant to kind of learn more about this dynamic. It's called site fidelity. It's a concept that stripers have habits and they go to specific places. So specifically in the river, every fish you take care of may come back next year and years after. And I got a little bit of heat from the head of the Department of Marine Fisheries to say that they're our Westport River stripers. Okay, they're a public resource. They belong. He said they belong to people in North Adams just as much as they belong to you. True. But why don't we consider them ours, right? Our neighbors, our friends, our fish while they're here. Take care of them. And if people from North Adams want to come down and fish, great. Fantastic. But we have a chance really to kind of adopt a conservation mentality locally that focuses on our fish. And I think it's not only a part of the overall solution, but it'll be a real boost to fishing in the Westport River, particularly in these upcoming years where there's going to be fewer fish around. And if we have a place where the fish survive and come back at a higher rate than average, then we'll have better fishing over those years that might be leaner everywhere else. So that's my pitch. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So these two guys have this business, and if you want to go out and catch a striper, you want to hook up with them. I don't know if you're going to bring one home, but they'll find them for you.
You're not, by the way.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about what we've done as an organization with the guidance and persuasion of a few individuals in this room. Gotta have it in the right place, I see. Okay, so about 4 years ago, I had the genius idea of having a fishing tournament as a fundraiser. And we're gonna charge $35 to join this tournament, and we were gonna have a $200 gift certificate from Keith down at Westport Marine. And I got 6 people to sign up. And the guy that won it was the son of one of our board members, so we couldn't even give him the present, okay? And then I meet this guy, Sam Bernard. Raise your hand, Sam, where are you? Come on. There he is, right there. So Sam said, Mike, you're charging the wrong amount of money. I said, how can it get any lower? Charge $1,000 and recruit the folks, some of the folks in this room that have businesses as guides, put people out on the water for a day, give them a nice dinner afterwards and a little bit of a talk, and it turned into a really successful fundraiser. So these are some pictures here from the last 2 years out on the water. We have had 10 boats. Now we're gonna have how many boats next year, Sam?
We have 14 signed.
14 boats, 2 to 3 people per boat, so it's expanded. We do a nice little
And
dinner
we do
afterwards.
have 24 anglers signed.
24 anglers, all right. So, but this group of guides who donated their time have persuaded us that we really want to do more in this area. So half of the money from this fundraiser goes into a pot that we use specifically for fisheries-related items. And the first project that these guys have come up with is something near and dear to them, which you've been hearing about tonight, and that is the striped bass population. So why don't we do a tagging program? You've already heard from Parker and Chris about the decline here. So, but this is one of the catches that's part of this, this population census that goes on. You know about the pressures already. So, what we tied in with this manufacturer. This is the tag that you see right there. I'm going to pass it around. You guys can handle it. It's like a little bit bigger than a AA size battery, and it's got a little magnet on it. As soon as you take the magnet off, it turns it on. And that thing will ping every minute for about 3 or 4 years. And we'll pick it up on these receivers. You can see the size of the receiver. It's like a big quart-sized bottle, and that's in the water. And this is listening all the time for these particular transmitters. Now, 2 years ago we started out. 2 summers ago we started out. First year, 10 boats, 20 anglers. Took us 2 days to catch our 10 fish and to do our tagging. And what you see here is our hospital boat, which happens to be one of our board members' fishing boats. It was a perfect platform to set up and do the operation, which I'm going to show you a little bit of if you're okay with watching a little bit of an incision here. So imagine a dozen boats, or at the first year 10, second year 12, out all over the river and out as far as Gooseberry and maybe over towards Seconic. When you catch a fish, you got to get it to the hospital boat. So everybody has a tank or a big cooler on board. And you put the fish in the cooler, and you keep that cooler aerated, and you get to the hospital boat. When you get to the hospital boat, there's another cooler. Now this cooler has a special anesthesia in it. And the fish will go in there and slowly he'll kind of go to sleep. It's a natural, I should say it's a fast acting and fast dissipating anesthesia because we want the fish to revive quickly. We also don't want, if the fish is caught right after we tag it, we don't want you taking it home and eating any of that anesthesia. So then the fish takes a few minutes for the fish to take to the anesthesia. And then you can see, it's a little smaller picture here, but the fish is lying in this V block here. And he's got water, he's got salt water being forced into his mouth and over his gills, keep him alive. And he's got a little rag over his head, especially when we turn him over his eyes to keep him from being startled or at least waking up, whatever. Then this is Scott Bennett. He's a fellow that works, at the time he worked for Marine Biological Labs down in Woods Hole. And he's expert at this procedure, so you're gonna see him conducting the procedure. First thing he does, he takes a scale sample and a tissue sample, and those will be sent for genetic analysis. And then he makes an incision, inserts the tag, 3 stitches up, and you'll see this procedure here. And then he attaches a visible tag in the tail of the fish. Okay, and then the fish goes into the recovery tank. How do we keep track of these fish? We put 3 receivers out. You see four indicators here. I did use different colors. One at the mouth. Actually, it's on the no wake buoy here at the mouth. One over at Sunk Rock on a rock buoy. And then we had not figured out where to put it in the West Branch. So the third receiver went on my dock for this short period of time before and 2 weeks after the tagging. And then we moved that one to the West Branch. So when you look at the results, you're gonna see 4 different colors of the results. And we've had money donated for a 4th receiver, and that location is yet to be determined. All right, so this is a little complicated to look at, but what you have here is each of these fish, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up here. And this is a timeline here, starting on the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, I guess, days that we tagged those fish, stretching out to the 18th of October. And this is the period of time where we had that receiver on my dock, and you can see all these different colors, where they've been. And we were a little concerned that when we looked at this data at first, we were kind of like, almost like a kid that came down too early to look at the Christmas tree, okay? Because look at this fish here, fish 4. He's hanging out over by Sunk Rock, and then he disappears. Whoops, did I go backwards? Yeah. He disappears. Where did he go? We expect if he disappears, he's gonna leave by way of the mouth, and there'll be a blue dot on his line. But he disappeared. This guy, we don't know where he went. This guy we saw only once. We're getting very concerned about either there's a high mortality in our river, or perhaps the procedure had a higher mortality. The procedure is only supposed to have a low single-digit mortality rate, okay? So we moved this particular receiver to the top of the West Branch, and then we collected more data. So here's that period on my dock, and there's a longer period here. Now here's the cool thing. Every one of those 10 fish showed up again, and the last marker we have for them is when they left the river. So we feel really good about the fact that all 10 fish survived the procedure. They survived for some period of time, and who knows what will happen this winter. Also within these results, we ended up with 5 fish. We have no idea whose fish these are, but we're now part of a consortium of people doing this kind of work all up and down the East Coast, and they're studying all kinds of fish. But everybody uses the same frequency, almost like the same radio channel. So our receivers are picking up their data, and their receivers all the way down the coast or up the coast will pick up our fish as well. So we're really interested to see where those 5 fish come from. 5 of them at the mouth. One of these guys made it over to Sunk Rock. Okay, so what are the long-term plans? I just spoke about this cooperative, this consortium that's called the Atlantic Telemetry Cooperative. We'll find out where our fish go, who's visiting us, and we're talking about expanding the program. We did 10 fish last year. We purchased 20 tags this year, and the guys who form this fisheries advisory committee of ours, by the way, the two of the guys you just met, Sam, a couple other guides, and then some board members from the Watershed. These folks are trying to guide our efforts here, and they've got some ideas about this year. Why don't we take a look at this very local and episodic event, which is they call the worm hatch in the west branch mostly, but also in the east branch. And then let's find out where some of our summer visitors are, because this was conducted in the fall. This was October when we tagged those fish, so we don't know if we just got a subset or subpopulation. And then, we hope, we may not have a study big enough to statistically contribute scientifically, but we hope to contribute to the body of knowledge about what's going on here. Now, I thought I'd finish up with a little fun video here I found online. If you're out on the water and every once in a while, you'll see this boil, okay? These striped bass or perhaps some other bluefish or whatever, but there'll be a boil and you say, boy, there's a lot of activity here. Well, this guy managed to capture what's going on under the water. So here you've got peanut bunker loaded with bait fish, pretty clear water, and you can see this school of fish almost acting in unison, hanging out together. And they pretty much try to trap the bait between the surface and where they are, so you see them puncturing the surface. And he goes on to a longer video about this. But anyway, this is something that obviously we'd like to see more of, and that's what our efforts are aimed at. And I think that's it. We'll take some questions if you'd like to offer.
You mentioned that all the fish, you saw them leave the river, so nothing indicate that any of those fish held over for the winter.
Exactly. I mean, because they seem to leave at different times, and the last indication for each fish was at the mouth. Now, we haven't downloaded that data since the 12th of November, or 15th of November. But all those receivers are out there. We may go out and find some came back. I don't know. But I'm encouraged by the fact that the last ping, and then there was silence, was on the way out.
The guy, Scott Bennett, who did this program of this, has been doing this in Woods Hole and Yale Pond for 5 or some years. And he's had the same fish at times come back for 5 years in a row, just to go back at Yale Pond and Woods Hole.
And they stay there. They stay there for the summer.
But they come back every year.
Right, but they come back every year.
Now, they have a very interesting situation down there. That business, if you will, that research operation, goes out and catches live fish and brings live fish back for research. In most cases, it's a squid. And squid have this very big central nerve that controls or is wired to their propulsion system. And because it's the same kind of wiring that we have from a biological standpoint, these fish are used for research for neurological diseases in humans. And they have a constant supply of either dead fish or dead squid, or let's put squid without this nerve dumped into that pond. So those fish have a constant feed. So it's almost like an artificially created habitat, if you will. Yeah. Gay.
There's a lot of concern about microplastics and PFAS in the waters we have. Are they testing the flesh for any of that when they're doing the sampling?
Good question, because the samples that we took, the flesh samples and the scale samples, they're on ice right now at about minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit, because Scott's waiting for some funding to get that testing done. And the fellow that these guys mentioned earlier, Ben Gehagen from Mass Fisheries, he actually consolidates a lot of work together, like hundreds or maybe 1,000 samples, and tries to get a deal on that. But the answer to your question is, we'll have to find out what they're looking for. I think it's mostly about sex, maybe age, or whatever genetic, or maybe tracing these fish, what the genealogy, you know, where it says they're from or whatever, I don't know. But we'll figure that out.
So this, besides the first thing I wanted to ask, because I'm an avid largemouth fisherman, how come it's always based on the length, besides the aspect of being able to keep it? Like, I weigh out my largemouth, so I'm interested in why it's not common to weigh them in like a conversation. Like, it's always inches, because
I think it's because it's easier.
It's just easier.
Your average recreational fisherman doesn't necessarily have a scale with them, a boga grip, whatever you might use for a strike. So it's just an easier thing. So it may be, I don't know if it's more or less accurate to the age of the fish, but it's just easier.
I just find like the weight more intriguing.
Yeah.
What about the way that you do tag them? Do the professionals do the catching of the ones that you tag?
In this case, a bunch of us caught them and brought them over to the hospital ship. So the hospital ship was kind of centrally located, and we kind of spread out, and when we caught a fish, we put it in our own cooler, and we motor over to the hospital ship, and
I'm interested in that. That's cool.
so, yeah, it's fun.
What were the sizes?
The size of the fish?
Yeah, what do they range?
Okay, so in order to use that, who's got the, in order to use that size tag, we have to have, it's a 21?
I was thinking 20 in my head.
20 inches and up, and they figure that in that case, this would represent no more than 2% of the body weight of the fish. That's the rule on using this one.
Okay, but in the fish that you caught, what was the spread as far as weight?
The spread was at the low end, and what we had
The biggest one's 34, I want to say?
34.
34.
A lot in the low 20s,
Okay,
below the slot.
okay.
Yeah. But I saw another hand back there.
Mike, is there an opportunity to reduce the consumption of striped bass by going to all of the restaurants and asking them not even to put that on the menu? Or is that not really?
Well, we could get out ahead of the regulation, but I think you want to start with advocacy and see if you can't. I mean, what's going to happen is there will be another event like there was in 79, or a change like there was in 79. You saw how successful that was with the moratorium. That's probably going to happen. In fact, when that happened, when that fisheries committee was formed, that was the first time they formed one for striped bass. They acted pretty quickly once it was formed, and it was, it made a huge difference. So I'd be a little reticent to go out and advocate a change like that at this point. I'd be more interested to push legislation on a state-by-state basis to try, or through the consortium of states to try to push for changes.
Are there any plans for like a centralized database so you guys can communicate easier when they, like you guys are saying, you have the same frequency? Is there, I know you had mentioned, is there like any plans for a centralized database so that way when they get a signal, you guys you'll know right away?
That's a good question. It's not real time, and
Okay.
and it's done quarterly.
Yep.
So these folks at the ACT consortium, they'll take the data in
Okay.
over the course of a quarter, consolidate it, and then push it out. So we haven't received any data yet. We were hoping to get the first batch back for tonight, but it didn't happen. I mean, it would be nice if it
Yeah.
was live,
Yeah.
but we don't want to be too live because then they're going to know where all the fish are.
That's gonna be a secret.
Do we know if they spawn at all here, any small percentage spawn, or are they just here to eat and hang out?
It's a really common question, and it's possible. We know there's holdover fish, up and down the East Coast, Connecticut River, Merrimack River, Cushnet River, up around Narragansett Bay. There's certainly holdover fish. I don't know that anybody really truly knows whether those fish are spawning. I mean, whether, do they, at the right time of year, do they have the right kind of conditions up north here that would generate spawning activity? I mean, I don't think anybody really knows that.
I was gonna take you to the next question. We talked about rebuilding the oyster reefs here. Is there any touch points between rebuilding oyster reefs and having better spawning grounds up the eastern seaboard too?
I couldn't tell you.
What about
Maybe Chesapeake.
brackish water? Are you gonna be tagging them like stripers from brackish?
so-
Because he just mentioned the
The
river.
river, yeah, the river.
Yeah, we don't have that much brackish water in the river except way up the East Branch. It's relatively salty through most of the mid and lower river. So the next tagging event is gonna be in the West Branch, and there the water's pretty salty.
That's
Um,
cool.
Paul?
So you talked about Florida having limits. What's the limit on stripers in Westport?
So in Westport River and all the East Coast, in the ocean, the limit is 28 to 31 inches, so you can,
How many can I catch?
one per day per angler.
And who manages that?
So it's the Atlantic Marine Fisheries Commission that was set up by Congress.
But I mean, if I bring my boat down to the river, down to the.
Oh, who's?
Who's?
Environmental
That's a different
police.
question. Environmental police, and that's one of the things that we're trying to explore, is how do we get the word out first, that there is a limit, there's a reason for that, and there's penalties for violating it, number one. That's sort of the carrot side maybe. Then the stick side is, how do we work better with our environmental police if we see illegal activity going on? And it's not that I wanna punish people, I just want them to stop if they're poaching fish. And I think that does happen in the river, and the environmental police are at the ramp, periodically, but they're not there every day, they're not there 24 hours a day. A lot of us are on the river a lot. And so we're trying to figure out how we can work with them and with the harbor master to notify them when we see something we think doesn't look quite right.
To his question about the regulations, is DMF thinking about anything for this year, like changing state level regulations for this year? Either the catch period or this lot?
The short answer is no. You want that one?
Yeah, I mean, they look at it every year, and they have hearings all the time about this kind of topic. For this year, it's gonna be the same. It's gonna be 28 to 31, one fish per angler per day. Excuse me, there's a lot of efforts from some people to try to take a look at making those more restrictive for recreational anglers. But you can imagine, it's a hot topic. When you go to the hearings, there's plenty of people there that think they're too restrictive. So it's, the regulators in Massachusetts do a very different, in all the states, have a difficult job. I mean, they're trying to answer to their stakeholders, and there's a lot of degrees of different opinion within that. But for this year, it's gonna be 28 to 31.
Being such a small slot limit reduces the amount, and being that there's not that many fish, that a legal harvest is not very big. And the other thing with being a slot limit is that when you're letting bigger ones, the bigger breeders go by, and I wanted to ask a question, but I was getting detoured, that actually the mortality, the major mortality, I believe, for striped bass is not fish being caught and eaten, it's fish who are caught and released and don't survive, which is why using barbless hooks, not keeping them out of the water very long is really important, because especially like if you're fishing and you're a guy like those two guys, you can catch the same fish over and over and again, and then they'll be around the next year as well. So the thing is they've been trying this for a while, is knocking that amount of mortality that is coming from being caught and released, because that's the biggest mortality right now.
And that's, as a result of our involvement with these folks and our relatively newly formed Fisheries Advisory Committee, we hope to do some advocacy things, like perhaps we talked about maybe a clinic, a hands-on clinic about best practices, and maybe even video it for people that can't be there. But a lot of us, we're not expert in what, Chris and Parker are talking about, and that is trying to keep the fish alive.
It's interesting that you did that collection, with the help of the guy from Woods Hole, in October. Now, I was always of the opinion
opinion, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but stripers like a 58-degree thermocline. They'll seek that out. So in the spring, the water temperature is conducive for them to be here. In the fall, again, as they're traveling through. But each year, the migration goes further and further up the North Shore, and now it's reached mid-Maine. Right? So those fish probably won't hold here because we have, I'm a kite flyer on the beach and I get the water temperature every day, and out front in August, that water temperature is getting damn close to 80. Which is crazy. And those fish won't hold in that kind of water. There's not enough oxygen for one thing. Right? So they, I don't know about fish holding over. And look at the river. God, the river, it's crazy in August what that temperature is. Especially up where I am at Cabin's Neck. It's like bath water. So I don't know about holding over.
We are lucky in our river that we do have a
Good
really
flow.
significant tidal change.
Yeah, good flow.
That's putting cooler water in and out of the river twice a day. So depending on when those high tides and low tides are during the day, when low tide, middle of the day, the mudflats heat up and you get a lot more warmer water. But the cooler water during the tidal exchange does really help mitigate some of that warm water.
So the way these tags work is just one piece of data. It's just the ID of the fish.
3-year time, remember?
Say again?
In the last 3 years, the tag?
Yeah, something, in and around that.
Okay.
So, but it's just one piece of data. It's just, this is my number. We could have got ones that had temperature and depth. But it didn't seem important. But what'll be interesting this year, if some of our fish come back, or the fish that we tag this year early, we'll be able to tell what they do, and when they do it, because the data is every minute. So if we can match the data, maybe they come in on a cooler tide and get out before it gets warmed up. I don't know, but we'll be able to look for certain things like that.
Obviously, the fish population of freshwater gets depleted quicker. Not as quick because it's not consumed. Catch and release.
Yeah.
The freshwater fish,
You're saying the population of freshwater fish,
More
and a contained body.
yeah, they don't, the population isn't as affected because they're not eaten as commonly.
Right.
So, we're saying most of the time,
Yeah.
the more chance of the fish dying is when they're.
So if they would release these stripers like I do, largemouth or whatever I get, I can't handle with care and make sure my revival rate is very on point.
Yeah.
And what if they would just start doing this with stripers? Everyone's not gonna do that, but it would be a star.
That's what they say.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
release it, not something.
Well, the thing about this is, that what I learned from these guys is that you think, oh, the commercial guys probably have a bigger impact. But when you look at the numbers, they're limited on their catch. And you do a calculation, or what the facts are about their numbers. And then you start to extrapolate what, from the limited data you get from recreational fishermen and how many recreational fishermen there are, you realize that most of the fish are taken by recreational fishermen. And if we're catching and releasing a lot of fish, there's that mortality, which the gentleman over here said is even worse than what we take. Yeah.
And they have a catch limit, so for commercials, so that's usually shuts down in what? First week in August? It's gone?
How about two more questions?
Let's say you end up catching a fish of a lifetime, let's say, or a really large fish, which is also a super breeder. Are there particular concerns in how to handle that fish?
It's all the same kind of rules. That Chris outlined is, time out of the water temperature is important, where it's hooked, getting it back in the water quickly. There's a great analogy that somebody brought up once. Imagine you just run a marathon. You cross the finish line and someone grabs you and sticks your head in the toilet. That's exactly what a fish is going through. They've just been in their environment. They've been struggling for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever, expending all this energy, and when we take them out of the water, they can't breathe. So that it really adds another whole layer of stress to them. So really, but big fish, little fish, it's really the same thing.
However, if I could just say one thing, part of the mortality study charts I didn't show you was bigger fish have a harder time recovering than smaller fish.
It's a bigger fight, right?
So it's a combination of
It's
things,
more
right?
weight, the way you handle it.
And so it's even more important that you have best practices around releasing big fish than small.
Yeah.
Smaller are just more durable.
One more question?
Quick question. When, local restaurants sometimes serve bass, is that right? Striped bass, is that right? So where do they get it? Especially, you know, if in this area, it's limited to one fish per person or whatever.
The restaurants would be buying commercially harvested fish.
Where does it come from? Where do they get it?
Fish markets, I mean, the commercial fishermen have certain locations that they can deliver their catches to, and those go into the, sort of the seafood system,
And
seafood
I
providers.
think to your point, commercial fishermen can keep more than one fish per person per day. They can keep more fish in, I think, at a slightly bigger size scale, but once they get up to a certain amount of total poundage for the year, the season stops. So there's a period when legally fish are harvested by commercial fishermen, and that ends up in stores and restaurants, but then there's a point when that stops because they've reached their limit.
Okay, two things before you all leave. April 30th, there's going to be a very interesting talk, similar subject, at the Grange, and it's going to be put on by Mass Fisheries Division, a fellow by the name of Ben Gahagan. He's going to come down here from Gloucester, and he's going to talk about a study that he's involved with, where he's tagged hundreds of fish and learned where they go and what they do, and it's going to be very interesting. So mark your calendars, the Grange on April 30th.
6 to 8.
6 to 8, thank you, Sam. And then you met our new director here. The reason we have a new director is because our current director is retiring. Deborah, stand up here, please, come on up here. Deborah has been with us for 11 years, and she announced her retirement several months ago with enough time for us to do a nationwide search. And Megan has big shoes to fill. Deborah's been with us and through a lot of things, including a big move to the new location at the River Center, the establishment of a decent fund of money that we've collected that contributes to our operations, and a lot of changes on the staff side. And but let's give Deborah a hand for everything that she's done.
Thank you all. It's really nice to leave things in great shape and a great future for our organization. If you haven't been to see us at the River Center, I'd say really come and visit. When you walk in the north part entrance of the building, you're stepping onto a to-scale floor map of the Watershed, which is really cool. And you'll learn a lot just by being there. We have lots of open house days. We have lots of talks. We're also having a talk in April on somebody was talking about plastics. It's going to be on plastics and recycling plastics, etc. So these are called nature talks because we think nature talks to us if we listen. So I encourage you to continue to engage with our organization and help us help the river and help the watershed be healthy. So thank you all.
Thank you, Deborah. All right,
I was
listen.
just gonna uphold, I gotta say one thing. Did we even mention this?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Well, and I just wanted to echo what Deborah said. So on April 30th, we are also having another talk, but if you are really ambitious, you could actually do 2 in one night. So from 5 to 6, we're having the Eco Art in Action, talking about plastics and upcycling and artwork with a local artist, Katie Rodden Walker, who will be with us at the River Center. So you are welcome to come to that. And then again, you can scoot right on over to the Grange and learn even more about striped bass. So please come, and as Deborah said, you are all welcome, and hope to get to know all of you in some capacity going forward. So grab a brochure if you'd like, grab an events list, and sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. So thanks for coming, and thank you to Parker and Chris and Mike, and Mike's gonna just share one more little bit.
No, I was just gonna mention, our annual meeting is April 12th. A lot of you here are members of our Watershed Association, so please feel free to come to the meeting. It's at a Coxit, and we'll be doing just a wrap-up of our activities for the year, but then we have a keynote speaker who's gonna talk about the oyster restoration project from the Nature Conservancy, so that'll be a nice day. That's April 12th, Sunday at 11 o'clock.
And you don't have to be a member to come, so it's open to anybody, and refreshments will be available, and it's an exciting project about this oyster reef restoration in our river, so.
And Sam would be punishing me if I didn't mention that you all have an opportunity to buy a fish tag for a mere $400, or if you really want to spend some money, $3,500 for one of those receivers. So thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate it.